Most terrorists are Muslims who target civilians systematically and deliberately, but the vast majority of Muslims are not terrorists. However, the concept of majority rule has not yet been introduced into Islamic societies in the Middle East. Muslim majorities in the Middle East, as well as in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the epicenter of Islamic terrorism, have always been denied civil liberties, oppressed by rogue regimes which ascend to and maintain power through violence, terrorizing those whom they cannot integrate, convinced that they are divinely ordained to rule. Rogue Muslim regimes have engaged in domestic, regional, and global terrorism, perpetuating the 14 centuries of megalomaniacal Islamic aspirations to rule the globe. They have advanced that aspiration through Islamic organizations and Islamic educational systems in mosques, kindergartens, and schools, as well as in the prison system, which have become the most effective production line of Islamic terrorists. Islam-driven terrorists believe in the divinely ordained deed waqf over the 8th century conquest of Spain, the 9th century subjugation of parts of Italy, and the 9th and 10th centuries occupation of Western Switzerland. They claim an irrevocable and perpetual Islamic title over the 8th century Islamic conquered areas in France, including Nice, irrespective of France's appeasement of Muslims and allowing terror organizations to operate offices in Paris. The deeper the appeasement, the more emboldened is anti-Western Islamic terrorism, literally stabbing the back of its host. Europe has underestimated the critical significance of the 14 centuries of Islamic aspirations in shaping contemporary Islamic education in Islamic and in non-Islamic countries, as well as Islamic culture, politics, peace, war, and Islamic attitude towards the arrogant Western infidel. The conduct of rogue Islamic regimes and organizations is heavily impacted by the legacy of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. For example, the 7th century Hijra, Islam-driven emigration, when Muhammad emigrated from Mecca to Yathrib, Medina, not to be integrated into Medina's social, economic, or political environment, but to impose Islam through migration, conversion, subversion, and terrorism. Asserting himself over his hosts and rivals in Medina, Muhammad gathered a critical mass of military power to conquer Mecca and launch Islam's drive to dominate the world. In 1966, the Hijra concept was applied by Mahmoud Abbas and Arafat, who fled from Syria to Jordan, incited the Palestinian population of Jordan, but failed in their attempt to topple the host Hashemite regime. In 1976, they failed in their attempt to topple the regime in Beirut. But in 1990, they collaborated with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, backstabbing Sheikh Sabah, who had hosted them, and 300,000 of their Palestinian relatives and associates since they fled from Egypt in the mid-1950s. In 2016, French Muslims study in Muslim schools and mosques that according to the Quran, humanity must submit to Islam, that holy war jihad must be conducted on behalf of Islam, that the participation in jihad rewards one with the benefits of paradise, that the infidels are doomed to the sword, that agreements with infidels are provisional, that emigration of the believers must serve the historical supremacist goal of Islam, and that shielding the believers may require the Quran-sanctioned taqiyya, deception-based statements, and that agreements with the infidel must be abrogated once conditions are ripe. Western societies have embraced Muslim immigrants who are largely ruthlessly controlled and manipulated by rogue terrorist supremacist organizations and regimes, which consider the immigrants a Muslim Trojan horse. Terrorists bite the hand that feeds them. In 1982, in the aftermath of Islamic Palestinian terrorist attacks in Paris, which claimed the lives of 6 patrons of Chez Joe Goldenberg restaurant and Israeli diplomat Yaakov Bar Simantov, Israel's ambassador to France, Meir Rosen, blamed countries which hosted PLO operatives for bringing the wrath of terrorism upon themselves. Ambassador Rosen was threatened with expulsion from France, but would not retract. In 2016, France is on the verge of anarchy, driven by Islam-driven terrorism and education. Have France and the West at large come to grip with reality, ready to dramatically overhaul their approach to counter-terrorism, and realize that draining hate education Islamic slumps in Islamic countries and on their own turf is a prerequisite for eliminating the individual mosquitoes of Islamic terrorism? The alternative will be violent anarchy. The next video will provide an overview of Islam-driven terrorism.